Welcome to this video, which is designed to give you some ideas on how to finish off your Egyptian gods presentation and a few extra things you can do with the real PowerPoint app on the computer. I'll also be showing you some examples of presentations that have improvements that could be made from previous years. Now, the first thing to focus on is the actual instructions themselves, which show you the content that you're expected to have. So double check that for every single slide you have the name of the god, that you have a picture of the god, that you have the god's name in hieroglyphics. That's something that's often missing. And importantly, some sort of story telling us what they're the god of. The other aspect is to focus on the fact that you're doing this for younger children. So if you've got too much very dense text, that may be hard for them to read. And the most common requirement that doesn't work is this idea that the presentation should run automatically without any intervention. And that's something which you can only really add using the proper PowerPoint app. So let's get into that now. Now, you may remember this presentation from previous videos. Now, I've added a whole heap of images here, and I'm going to be showing you something about those images in a few moments. But this presentation is currently running in the online version. It's actually running in my browser. So as long as it's installed on the computer, you can press this Open in Desktop app button. Now, if you haven't actually accessed the real version of PowerPoint before on the computer, you may find that you have to log in. I'm already logged in on this particular machine, so it knows about my OneDrive, but you may have to go through the login process on your machine in order to make this work. And here you can see the presentation has now been loaded in full into the full program. And what's important is you have a whole heap of additional menus that you can use, and lots of these facilities can be played with and experimented with. In particular, more transitions, more animations, and the slideshow menu. Now, the slideshow menu is essential for finishing off your presentation because you can use Setup Slideshow and select that your presentation loops continuously until the escape key on the keyboard is pressed. So click this option and then click OK, and the presentation at the very end will go back to the beginning. The other thing you can do is to rehearse timings, and this allows you to run through the presentation and the computer will remember when you click the mouse. From then on, when you run the presentation, it will automatically run through those timings. So those two things, Setup Slideshow and Rehearse Timings, are essential before your presentation is fully complete. The other thing you can do through the desktop app is to go and save a copy of your presentation as a local copy on the N drive on the computer. Your teacher will give you more details of that. That then allows you to insert your presentation on your workbook page in OneNote. Now, it's very common for students to have lots and lots of images on their presentations, and here I've got loads. Every time you store an image in your presentation, it has to have that image stored within the PowerPoint itself, and that takes up a lot of space. If you pop to the File menu and click Info, it will tell you how big your presentation is. This presentation is actually quite small because I've already optimized the images, but I'm just going to add a couple more images and see what happens. Okay, it was about 200 and something K before. If I click Info, our presentation is now 1.97 megabytes. That's nearly 10 times bigger than it was before. Now, the first thing I can do is to make sure my pictures are a little bit smaller, all right? You don't need the pictures to be quite as large, particularly if they're featuring within your presentation like this. The other thing I can do is to make sure that the computer compresses the pictures as small as possible. So if I select one of the pictures and then pop up to the Picture Format tab, and then across to Compress Pictures, a dialog box appears. And if you're planning to do this to the whole presentation with lots of images, untick the box that says Apply Only to this picture. Keep the one below ticked, which is to delete cropped areas of the pictures. That's good. Okay, available lower resolutions will be highlighted, and so I can click the lowest of those and then click OK. If I save the presentation at this stage, then I can click on Info and notice that it's now been dropped from 2 megabytes down to 333K, which is much more manageable. So just to recap, we've looked at the idea of the slideshow menu, Setup Slideshow and Rehearse Timings to make sure your presentation meets those requirements. We've also looked at how to make our images a bit smaller, so it's easier to upload our presentation to OneNote later. So assuming our presentation now has all the content, what else have we got to do? This is an example of a student's presentation from a previous year, so let's have a look and see if we can make any improvements. It's certainly nice and bright. This is the front screen. Perhaps this old-fashioned looking shape, perhaps the presentation may be improved even by just removing that. Makes it look a little bit more modern. If we look at the next slide, this is a classic issue that we sometimes see. First of all, notice that we've got a picture of the god, we've got some information, we have the name of the god here inside the text, but there's no title. A lot of wasted space here. Pretty nicely styled, but notice what's happening to the writing down here. The background, a lovely image to be honest, is completely killing off all of the text near where the sun is. You have to be really careful with background images. Now, there are two ways that you can solve this. The first method might be to change the background itself so that it's easier to read the writing in the foreground. And so we can do that by clicking on Picture Format, and there are various options to recolor or correct the picture. So for example, under Corrections, bearing in mind the text is quite light, I could make the background significantly darker. Now that does make the background harder to see, but it does definitely make the writing easier to read. The other option is to change the writing itself. So we can, for example, put a background on this text box, and we can do that by clicking in Shape Format and selecting Shape Fill. Now if I put a kind of, yellow or orange background on there, you'll notice I can immediately see all of the text now. The only problem is I can't see any of the background picture. But if you dig a bit deeper in Shape Fill, you'll notice it says More Fill Colors. And if you select More Fill Colors, this dialog box allows you to add transparency. So you can make that flat color a little bit transparent, maybe say 40% or so. And now you can see we've got this color, meaning we can see the text filling up the box, but you can still see behind the box. Notice we have the same issue on this slide. Okay, the text is so dark, it's very difficult to read the writing. Perfect where it's light. Another method that can be used is to bring the color forward, maybe because it's such a dark background, choosing a lighter text color like this, but also adding a shadow. So as well as bold, italic and underline up here in the format menu, we also have a shadow option. If you press shadow on writing, you'll notice that the text pops out a little bit better. Now, if we go to the last slide, you'll notice there's a very, very vague who to thank with one little web link here. However, these web addresses are often quite ugly. If you have got a web link going to a particular website, you can select and edit the link. This allows you to directly change the address it's going to, for example. However, you can also change the text to display. Very often what I do with this is I just remove some of the web address stuff, so that it still looks like a web address, but underneath it will actually take us directly to that website. Do make sure that you include all of the places that you've got your web content from. So the important thing, a few weeks after you've completed any assignment, is to go back before you've got to hand it in and to look at it and see if there are any improvements you need to make. And a critical final thing to do is to always reread the task in full to make sure that you have included everything that's going to be assessed. So the very best of luck for your finishing off of your initial presentations.